Well, welcome to the second chapter of the book of Isaiah. Hopefully you enjoyed the last video we did on the chapter 1. Now we're getting to chapter 2, continuing this grand vision of the prophet Isaiah. This one is going to be more, from his standpoint, more forward thinking, basically more of like our day and age kind of an idea. So more latter day prophecy is going to come out of this chapter. Now, this chapter is a great one to compare in the Book of Mormon, 2 Nephi 12. He does a lot of quoting in 2 Nephi 12, of Isaiah, basically in there. And so he puts them in there. So we'll see some differences between those two, some good comparisons there. So verse 1, the word that Isaiah the son of Amos saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem. It shall come to pass that in the last days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established in the top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow unto it. So in here we see this prophecy of the mountain of the Lord's house. This is talking about a temple, shall be established in the tops of the mountains. So this is a temple at the tops of the mountains, basically. It shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow unto it. So what's interesting is these same verses appear in Malachi 4, 1 through 5. It is not known whether they were revealed first to Isaiah or to Micah. Not Malachi, Micah, excuse me. I said that wrong. So it's interesting that these were there. So is Isaiah quoting Micah, or is Micah quoting Isaiah? We don't quite know, but this is kind of the same prophecy, same words here. Mountain of the Lord in the last dispensation refers to the restoration of the church. President Harold B. Lee said the coming forth of his church in these days was the beginning of the fulfillment of the ancient prophecy when the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established in the tops of the mountains. So there's some fun ways to interpret and think about verse 2 here, basically, of the temple, Salt Lake Temple in Utah. Could be there, nations flowing into it. Some people would even say that was the Olympics, 2002 Olympics, that Utah, Salt Lake City hosted. There's different possibilities of flowing to General Conference or other things like that. There could be even more future interpretations of how to fulfill that as well. Let's jump to verse 3 now. It says, and many people shall go and say, come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of God of Jacob. So that's two ways to describe temples. And he will teach us of his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. Now you might say, this sounds kind of strange. Yes, people going up to the temple to learn of God and to be willing to keep his commandments and follow him. But there's right at the end there, it says, for out of Zion shall go forth the law and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. So there's a delineation difference between those two that is made. So Jerusalem is a city. Zion actually is a city, also called the New Jerusalem. We hear the city of Zion, the city of Enoch from the old world in Genesis. Of course, again, the pearl of great price, you get more about that as well in the book of Moses. But they will come down in the future prophecy. The city of Zion will come out of heaven, come down and meet with the city of New Zion on earth. They'll come together to form a greater Zion, and then Jerusalem in the old world will be there. So it'll be like two major centers. Zion is where the law shall go forth. So rules, governments, those things will be ruled from Zion, which is the New Jerusalem, and the word of the Lord, or religious teachings, from the old Jerusalem. So we'll have a political, governmental, organizational structure center of the earth and a spiritual center of the earth. These are two locations, basically. In fact, Joseph Fielding Smith expanded on this. He said, we are informed in the revelation given to Joseph Smith the prophet that the city of Zion and the New Jerusalem is one and the same. You can look at Doctrine and Covenants 28, 42, 45, and 57 and 58 for information about those sections. He continues on, Jerusalem of old, after the Jews have been cleansed and sanctified from all their sin, shall become a holy city, where the Lord shall dwell, and from whence he shall send forth his word unto all people. Likewise, on this continent, the city of Zion, New Jerusalem, shall be built, and from it the law of God shall also go forth. There will be no conflict, for each city shall be headquarters for the Redeemer of the world, and from each he shall send forth his proclamations as occasion may require. Jerusalem will be the gathering place of Judah and his fellows in the house of Israel, and Zion will be the gathering place of Ephraim and his fellows, upon whose heads shall be conferred the richer blessings. These two cities, one in the land of Zion and one in Palestine, are to become capitals for the kingdom of God during the millennium. So this is getting into millennium stuff, so even future for us. In the meantime, while the work of preparation is going on and Israel is being gathered, many people are coming to the land of Zion, saying, Come ye, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. The Latter-day Saints are fulfilling this prediction, since they are being gathered from all parts of the earth and are coming to the house of the Lord in these valleys of the mountains. Here they are being taught in the ways of the Lord through the restoration of the gospel, and by receiving blessings in the temples now erected. Moreover, before many years have passed away, the Lord will command the building of the city Zion, and Jerusalem and Palestine will in due time be cleansed to become a holy city, and the habitation of the Jews, after they are cleansed and are willing to accept Jesus Christ as their Redeemer. This is in Doctrines of Salvation, Volume 3, is where you can find more on this. So realize that this is Joseph Fielding Smith talking. So we've had a lot transpire since he did that, because Israel wasn't a nation. Israel now is a nation, and the Jews are gathering to that. A lot of people going back to live in Jerusalem, to live in Israel, the nation, to build it out, and there's actually talk of even restoring the temple. They're building the altars and putting the temple back up and things again as well. So that's a resurgence that's relatively recently happening. Lots of great things that are happening with that, as also the New Jerusalem was in Jackson County, Missouri, is where the gathering place of the saints in the early days of the church history is where they were gathering for that. Now, Harold B. Lee also said this. He says, I have often wondered what that expression meant, that out of Zion shall go forth the law. Years ago, I went with the brethren to the Idaho Falls Temple, and I heard that an inspired prayer of the First Presidency, heard in that inspired prayer of the First Presidency a definition of the meaning of that term, out of Zion shall go forth the law. Note what they said. We thank thee that thou hast revealed to us that those who gave us our constitutional form of government were men wise in thy sight, and that thou didst raise them up for the very purpose of putting forth that sacred document. It's the Constitution of the United States. This is that's probably quoted from the dedication of the Idaho Falls temples. I'm assuming where that comes from. We pray that kings and rulers and the peoples of all nations under heaven may be persuaded of the blessings enjoyed by the people of this land, by reason of their freedom and under thy guidance, and be constrained to adopt similar governmental systems, thus to fulfill the ancient prophecy of Isaiah and Micah, that out of Zion shall go forth the law and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. So that was in the improvement era of October of 1945. So some great things that we get to think about with this idea of in the future, when Christ comes again, basically there will be the old Jerusalem restored, and the new Jerusalem will be places where he rules and reigns and teaches and ministers to the people, basically. So now in verse 4, getting back to Isaiah, this is still continuing this idea of the millennial time. It says in verse 4, and he shall judge among the nations and shall rebuke many people. They shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more. So this is one of the beauties of when Christ comes, they'll be like, there's no point in fighting anymore. We don't want to do this anymore. He will rebuke many people. So he's probably going to be stopping a lot of, like, you guys stop killing each other. This is nuts. Let's knock this off. So in the Old Testament study manual, they say These verses deal with the ushering in of the millennial era and with the changes that will accompany it. The writings of Isaiah, as found in the Book of Mormon, show the following additional phrase for verse 5. So verse 5 says, O house of Jacob, come ye, let us walk in the light of the Lord. And the Book of Mormon version of verse 5 says, Yea, come, for ye have all gone astray, every one to his wicked ways. That's 2 Nephi 12:5 is where we can find that. This verse indicates a widespread apostasy in Israel and the return of Israel to the Lord before the second coming. So that's what we get at, is understanding that Israel will come back before the second coming. A restoration of Israel will be there. Kyle and Delitzsch in their commentary in the Bible on the Old Testament, says that they translated the phrase, and this is verse 6. Let's jump to verse 6 then. Therefore thou hast forsaken thy people, the house of Jacob, because they replenished from the east and are soothsayers like the Philistines, and they please themselves in the children of strangers. So what Kyle and Delitzsch in their Old Testament commentary translated this to say, and with the children of foreigners they go hand in hand. So in short, ancient Israel was joining the heathen nations in all their wickedness, and modern society is joining with the influences of the world rather than looking to the Lord. So that's what verse 6 is talking about, is somebody pleasing themselves in the children of strangers in today's world sounds pretty immoral or nefarious. And what he's saying is that Israel is basically ancient Israel joined with the heathen nations. They said, we want to be like you guys and be a part of your club. And they did that. And they're saying in the latter days, of course, that's kind of the same idea of the people will want to follow the world. The world's influence will be far great and just really tremendous. And it's going to be hard for the people who are following God to follow God, because the world's influence will be so strong, basically, against him. Now, verse 7, their land also is full of silver and gold, neither is there any end of their treasures. Their land is also full of horses, neither is there end of their chariots. So this, if you look at this, is an important thing for us to think about, because in verse 7, he's talking about how the people in the last days will be full of wealth, lots of wealth, which most likely means a lot of pride and challenges that go along with wealth, full of horses and neither an end of their chariots. This doesn't mean they're going to have lots of cars. This is more symbolic of war. They will be very prepared and stocked up for war, basically. That's what it is. So having lots of horses and having lots of chariots is a symbol for warfare. So verse 8, their land is also full of idols. They worship the work of their own hands, that which their own fingers have made. So they are, again, idolatry. That's spiritual adultery, basically. They are worshiping what they have made. I am creating something and I'm worshiping it, and not so much maybe believing it as a god, but putting more emphasis and love into it than I am with God. Basically, they're creating their own gods, creating their own systems of worship that they want to have. Verse 9, and the mean man boweth down, and the great man humbleth himself, therefore forgive them not. So an interesting quote on this one, the mean man boweth not down, the great man humbleth himself not. There's some emphasis in there from, if you compare this with 2 Nephi 12:9, the differences in the Book of Mormon accounts of Isaiah's writings, noted by the italics, show that Isaiah was not making further reference to idolatry, but was referring to the fact that men would not worship the true God. In the preface to Doctrine and Covenants, which is section 1, the Lord indicated this failure would be a major concern of the last days. So again, people who are not willing to follow God, they're going to follow what they want to do. They're going to put their own systems in place, their own substitutes for God in place, basically. Now, continuing on with this Old Testament study manual, he says, because of her sins, ancient Israel brought upon herself the judgments of God, and because of the same problems, the people of the last days will likewise bring sorrow and problems upon themselves. The brass plates contained other differences that clarify Isaiah's meanings. So you can compare with more of Isaiah chapter 12 as well to get more about this. 2 Nephi 12, to get more meaning on that. But that's what's going on, basically. That people are not using forgiveness. People are not forgiving each other, which means they're not seeking mercy, they're seeking justice. They demand justice of other people. They are not worshiping God. They are supplanting God and doing their own thing instead of worshiping God. So this is, again, describing the latter days, prepared for war, lots of opportunities for war, a lot of resources ready for war, lots of wealth and treasures and opportunities. Now verse 10, let's continue on here. Enter into the rock and hide thee in the dust, for fear of the Lord and for the glory of his majesty. So enter into the rock and hide thee in the dust. This is like going into a cave or hiding under dirt, basically, for fear of the Lord and for the glory of his majesty. This is verse 11 now, continuing on with this idea. The lofty looks of man shall be humbled, and the haughtiness of men shall be bowed down, and the Lord alone shall be exalted in that day. So when Christ comes in the midst of all this craziness that's happening around him, the wicked are going to hide. They're going to want to find a way to get away from him and not be seen by him, basically, and hide. Verse 12, for the day of the Lord of hosts shall be upon everyone that is proud and lofty, and upon everyone that is lifted up he shall be brought low. So this is not a good day if you are wicked, basically. Keil and Delitzsch, in their commentary of the Old Testament, said they were the loftiest and most impressive trees. Oh, talking about cedars of Lebanon. Sorry, that's the next one. So we'll jump into that as well to kind of continue on here. Verse 13, and upon all the cedars of Lebanon that are high and lifted up, and upon all the oaks of Bashan. If you remember, we talked about oak in the last chapter. Oak is a very hard wood. It's a very strong wood, very coveted because of its strength and abilities. Cedars of Lebanon is a very tall tree. They were highly sought after, amazing trees in the ancient world. So they were the loftiest, most impressive trees in the ancient Middle East. They therefore symbolize not only the great beauty of the land that would be destroyed, but also the proud and the lofty people of the earth. So if you are full of lots of pride, if you are full of lots of things, like you're built up, you've tried to make your image more important than everybody else's image, when the Christ comes, it's not going to be a good day for you, basically. Not going to be a good day. Everyone's going to be humbled. Whether some will be humbled anyways, and others are going to be compelled to be humbled. That's basically what's going to go on. So he says now in verse 14, and upon all the high mountains and upon all the hills that are lifted up, upon every high tower, upon every fenced wall, and upon all the ships of Tarshish, and upon all the pleasant pitchers. And the loftiness of man shall be bowed down, and the haughtiness of men shall be made low, and the Lord alone shall be exalted in that day. So it's going to be a very big change from how things are running today in the world. In fact, Keil and Delitzsch, again in their commentary, said trade with other nations would cease. Such trade had been established and had prospered during the reign of the kings of Uzziah and Jotham. So that's not going to happen anymore. Again, the Book of Mormon affirms the completeness of the record from which its Isaiah citations were taken. Sperry illustrated this contribution. So let's take a second and do a little comparison between the Book of Mormon's Isaiah and the Old Testament's Isaiah to look at these concepts here. So in 2 Nephi 12:16, same as Isaiah 2:16, The Book of Mormon has a reading of remarkable interest. It prefixes a phrase of 8 words not found in the Hebrew or King James versions. Since the ancient Septuagint, which is the Greek version of the Old Testament, concurs with the added phrase in the Book of Mormon, let us exhibit the readings of the Book of Mormon, the King James Version and the Septuagint as follows. So we're going to compare these together. This is what Sperry is doing. He said, here's Book of Mormon, and upon all the ships of the sea, and then that's not in the King James area, basically. They say upon all the ships of Tarshish. And then in the Septuagint, and upon every ship of the sea, and upon all the ships of Tarshish, and upon all the ships of Tarshish, upon all the pleasant pictures, upon every display of fine ships. So we can see the Septuagint and the Book of Mormon are a little bit more closely related. So the Old Testament only says upon the ships on Tarshish, not the ships on the sea and on, as well as Tarshish, whereas the Septuagint kind of brings both of them together. So he goes on to say the Book of Mormon suggests that the original text of this verse contained 3 phrases, all of which commenced with the same opening words, and upon all. By a common accident, the original Hebrew and hence the King James Version text lost the first phrase, which was, however, preserved by the Septuagint. The latter lost the second phrase and seems to have corrupted the third phrase. The Book of Mormon preserved all 3 phrases. Scholars may suggest that Joseph Smith took the first phrase from the Septuagint. The prophet did not know Greek, and there is no evidence that he had access to a copy of the Septuagint in 1829 and 1830 when he translated the Book of Mormon. So this is out of Sidney Sperry's book, The Voice of Israel's Prophets. So what he's talking about in there is he's comparing Isaiah in the Old Testament and Isaiah in the Greek translation, the Septuagint, and Isaiah in the Book of Mormon, and he's showing how the Book of Mormon version of Isaiah actually tends to match up better with older manuscripts than with the Old Testament version of Isaiah, basically, which is really cool thing to look at. How would Joseph Smith get the Septuagint? There's no indication he had it. According to what Sperry is saying, there's no indication he knew it, not to mention, could he read it if it's in Greek? So that's part of the challenge that some people have with this is, here's where we have an opportunity when we, again, talk about translations and other things. We have this opportunity of comparison. And so because of that, we have an opportunity to look at this from a different perspective. So the Old Testament and the Book of Mormon aren't the same. Well, the old manuscript, the Septuagint, actually matches more with the Book of Mormon. So that's good evidence to look at and go, maybe Joseph Smith was a prophet. Maybe he knew what he was doing when he put the Book of Mormon together. It's not just a byproduct of the 19th century. Scholars will have you believe that the Book of Mormon is a byproduct of the 19th century. It is a book written for the 19th century. And what we're seeing here is there are ways to technically look at it from that perspective, but there are other ways of saying, but there's enough in here to show this isn't just written for the 19th century. This is a much better book, more opportunities for us to learn from. So some great things we get to learn in here. Now, and if you look in your footnotes in the old King James Version of the Old Testament, it'll say there, the Greek Septuagint version has one phrase, the Hebrew does not. The Hebrew has one phrase, the Greek does not. But 2nd Nephi has both of them, basically. It's really fascinating. Now verse 17, and the loftiness of man shall be bowed down, and the haughtiness of men shall be made low, and the Lord alone shall be exalted in that day. So again, everything in the world that's going to be, the world is amazing, pop culture, all this great stuff's up here, it's all going to crumble to the ground, and God is going to be seen up here, basically. Verse 18, the idols he shall utterly abolish. So reestablish your priorities, folks. God is going to be the main priority now. Verse 19, and they shall go into the holes of the rocks and into the caves of the earth for fear of the Lord and for the glory of his majesty when he ariseth to shake terribly the earth. It's going to be a doozy. Again, if you are not a follower of Christ, the last days and the beginning of the millennium is not going to be a time you want to be around for. Verse 21, to go into the clefts of the rocks, into the tops of the ragged rocks, for fear of the Lord, for the glory of his majesty, when he ariseth to shake cherubim. Oh, I think I just read that one. Sorry. Cease. Verse 22, cease ye from man, whose breath is in his nostrils, for wherein is he to be accounted of? So there's another way to interpret this. Cease depending on mortal man. He is of little power compared to God. So this idea of trust in God, not in the arm of flesh. So even though flesh sounds logical, flesh sounds powerful, lots of, nuclear bombs and guns and the ability to kill you and do things like this, but nothing compared to what God has. And when his might comes, when he comes during the millennial reign, it's going to be a very different perspective. And we're going to be like, no, he's got the power. The rest of us are nothing compared to him. So let's make sure that we are focusing on Christ in our life, putting him at the center of our life and prioritizing him. If there's one thing we can definitely say of this post-pandemic world, is it is more important than ever that we are on purpose with everything we do in life. There's so many opportunities. There's so many things going so many different directions, so many things that could be a priority. How do we pick which one? That's up to us. You will always get your most important priorities met, no matter what it is. It's a subconscious thing. So let's put God as the most important priority. That's going to be a very important thing for us to do, to continue to keep his commandments and follow his laws and do what he wants. That's important. So thanks for watching. Hope you're liking these videos. Like and subscribe to our channel to get more of these, and we'll see you in the next video.